We're going to make a filigree ball. You can make it a perfect sphere, but I quite like the lozenge shape. This size, this is 32 millimeters diameter. This takes 3/4 of a meter of 1 millimeter wire. So 750 millimeters, 75 centimeters. And when you're making a dome, you have to make it roughly a third bigger than the finished product, because as you dome it, it'll shrink. Now, this is wire, and wire will stretch, so the old formula of a third bigger doesn't work, and we're not making a perfect hemisphere. Well, you can if you want. So start by deciding what size you want. This is a 30 millimeter circle that I used for my initial playing, and I suggest you get copper wire and just make a variety of shapes until you come up with something you like. Work within that circle, and you really need to make sure that both sides are symmetrical, because when you start to solder, after you dome it, you start to solder the pieces together to make your sphere. If it's not perfectly symmetrical, it will be off and it will be difficult to solder, and it won't be equal. So get yourself some copper wire, just play. I've found that to make the heart shape that is the basic of what I used takes a 40 millimeter long piece, and the jump rings are 4 millimeter inside diameter. So you can see basically it's just a heart shape with the jump ring in the middle. A very nice, simple pattern. Make it as complicated as you want. And that's a wolf. So once you've done your experimenting with your copper and you've gotten your sizes correct, and if you've used copper the same size as your silver, then you know what to do to make your pieces. So cut the pieces you need. Make sure they're all the same length. File the ends just a little bit, both ends, and because you're using your side cutters to cut them, it'll leave a bit of a point. So get that little point off, because it'll make it nicer once you've made the piece and you're ready to solder it. Now, for me, I'm bending the pieces in the middle. I use my parallel jaw pliers, and just by pushing that against the side of the pliers, I get the angle I want. Yeah? So that's a 90-degree angle. If you want less of an angle, you can do it, but it's not going to be quite so sharp on the end. Make all of the angles exactly the same. And I use my flat, round pliers, and I put a mark on the pliers so that you can have the same curve every time. And I just curve the ends over towards each other, bend the wire until they touch, and that's your little heart shape that's ready to use. Now, you don't have to have a perfect join up here where these two ends touch, but they do have to touch because we're going to solder them. So make all of those pieces and make them the same. Now, if you're using jump rings as a filler, and the thing about filigree is it's just filling a space with wire shapes. If you're using jump rings, make sure that you close the ends like you would for a chain. Make them as perfect as you can, because they are also going to be soldered, and we want a good solder join. So do your layout on a soldering pad, and you really want to work to a correct size. Now I've scribed the circle, the size that I'm going to be laying this piece out, because initially I was going to put a piece of wire around the outside, and then I realized that it would be a lot nicer if it were just the filigree itself holding itself together. So lay this out. Be sure you stay inside your circle, just inside your circle. Make it as accurate as you can. This is a soldering pad, but normally I would use charcoal. I'm just using this because I don't have a clean charcoal. Now you can see I'm one short for this size, so I'll make another one to fit in here. And then I'm going to put the jump rings in here and make sure the join is touching the side. Take your time, get it as nice as you can. Yep. So, one to go. Now at this point, mix up your flux. It would be nice if it was slightly watery. And you're going to just touch a little bit of flux to each point where you want this to solder. Now, you'll notice that there's no solder involved at this point. All I want to do is just warm up the flux, get it so it's kind of a crusty white, like that. And if we let it cool off a little bit, the flux will hold everything in place so that we can place our solder. Now I'm going to put all of my chips of solder here, and I'll place them at each point with my flux brush, and then as we start soldering we can just go around the whole piece, do one join at a time. I forgot to do the tops of the hearts, but the flux acts like a nice bit of glue because everything is quite stable for you to place all of your solder bits. So at each point, and I know it's fiddly, but at each point where the metals touch that you want to solder it, put a little solder chip. Okay, it looks like we're set up. I'll zoom in a little. Now, look at your piece with a critical eye. Try to make sure that each place has solder on it. Have a few little extra pieces of solder. Have your solder pick in your hand in case you find a couple that you missed. It's quite easy to just place it with the pick. Same old neutral flame as always. And if you have a piece that's slightly off, as you solder, you can just push it gently with your solder pick. So I've dried the flux again. This isn't level here, so what I'll do is wait until I get some of it soldered. So pay attention to where your flame is, because we don't want to melt anything that we don't want soldered. You can see I was missing a little piece here. Come on. So just focus on one joint at a time. And this is the one that isn't level. Now the block is softer than I'm used to. Yep, missed one there. Missed one there. So now I'll go back, pick up a little piece of solder. This is a lot easier to do on a charcoal block. It's a lot more forgiving. So after you get it all soldered, warm it up and push it. Oh, I didn't get that one soldered together. I found two joints that weren't soldered. So I'll solder those, warm it up, push it to get it so it's not stuck to the block. Quench it and pickle it. So come out of the pickle, have a close look at your joins, look at every join, and make sure they're all soldered. If they're not, now's the time. So just do one at a time, be very precise. So come out of the pickle, look the piece carefully again. It's taken me 3 times to get all of the joins. So now, take a wooden doming block or a metal doming block. It doesn't really matter, except that if you use the metal one, it tends to flatten the outside of the wire. You can see I just pushed it in with my fingers. You can use a metal doming block punch to finish forming it. Now this, I think, is a quite nice piece as it is, but the idea was to make an enclosed filigree ball. So make another one of these, form it, put the two together, and solder it in. About 3 places should be all you need. It doesn't need to be strong, it just needs to be connected. And then chuck it in a tumbler. Done. It's a bit fiddly, but I think it's worth it. So that's half the ball. Tidy it up a little bit with your sanding stick. If you did a good soldering job, you shouldn't have to tidy it up much. And all of your mistakes put on the inside. So when you're starting to form it with the good bit on the outer side. Yeah. You make another one, and then when you put the two of them together, the filigree ball.